First of all, I'm very happy to welcome Nikita, who came in just from New York City this morning, basically. So, and I was already mentioning GLP-1s. Some of you might have heard something about that today. I mean, it was in some of the presentations, and I think it's now something that everybody really has heard about properly, also in all kinds of lifestyle magazines. But you are here today with us to talk also about the aspect of these drugs, let's say, that are beyond weight loss. And in that context, you could also maybe quickly introduce Fountain Health.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here. Want to thank everybody at DLD for inviting me out, and it's great to be sharing the stage with you. So before we get in and talk about all of these different interventions, GLP-1s, peptides, ketamine, just want to share a little bit of perspective on how we developed Fountain Health. So over the last century, the mind and the body have been treated as two separate things in medicine. We created silos, we created different specialties, different clinics. And as we began to work with patients, what we found is the patients that are presenting with anxiety, burnout, ADHD, and depression, when we looked beyond just the symptom, we found out that these people were also experiencing different biological issues, such as metabolic dysfunction, issues with their hormones, micronutrient deficiencies. And that's really what led us to developing the thesis that the biology is more than just important to your mental health. Mental health is actually deeply biological. And so we built an entire care model around this, where every single patient that's coming into our clinic is getting full lab tests. And we're looking at the impacts of all of the systems in the body, first and foremost on one's function, but eventually, how does that affect their mental health?
Yeah, and I think like where we had many conversations about this today, I feel like that we just start to understand the connections between several kind of, I don't want to even say like modern problems, but insulin resistance and kind of microbiome questions around digestion. Then also something like perimenopause, testosterone loss, basically, in both sexes, basically. So, but they all kind of, so far, were kind of singular elements or problems showing up and being diagnosed as such. But so altogether, they seem to create like a more than a diagnose, but just actually something that every human being will be affected by once it ages. So, and now we also see that the psychiatry is kind of ignoring these things, kind of, and meaning that some people will have a psychiatric diagnosis, but maybe they don't, maybe they just have not looked into these other things. So what has psychiatry missed in these last 20 years?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So psychiatry today, and I don't know the German healthcare system, but in the US, there is a huge focus on symptom management, and how do we manage those symptoms through medication. A lot of providers are using the DSM-5 today, which is sort of the standard model, and they're trying to understand what are the cluster of symptoms that a patient is presenting with over an extended amount of time. And so for us, what we found interesting is you can have two patients that are presenting with anxiety. One of those patients could have chronic sleep disruption, they could have dysregulated hormones, and another patient could be metabolically sick, or maybe they have insulin resistance. Under today's traditional model, both of those patients are going to go through the same course of treatment, which is most likely going to be some form of psychiatric medication. And so, through our approach, the baseline of every single patient is to understand their lab work. And that then becomes the foundation on which we build the care plan. So, we believe that mental health care has to be individualized. people have different stressors, different biology, and all of this has to be accounted for in the treatment plan that you're putting together for that patient.
Yeah, and I mean, so obviously a lot of people probably come to you and say that they're on SSRIs and nothing is basically moving, or that they might, battle addiction and so on. So, and we also, in this morning, in the first talk, was already mentioned that a lot of times GLP-1s stop cravings, any kind of cravings, like addiction, like drinking, smoking, gambling, any kind of addiction, basically. But also, like, and some people report that they stop the food noise they're always hearing. So, and of course, as we know also from the psychedelic context, those symptoms or reaction, like the things that will affect your life, have mostly like maybe trauma related kind of reasons and will follow up in your life later on. But suddenly we have this insight that GLP-1s kind of stop these cravings on a biological or physiological level. So, but still there is this thing you might want to find out what has happened to you. So, how do you balance this out in terms of like like a biology around this and a psyche topic more around this? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. So, as we began to explore the mind body connection, that's what led us to use a range of interventions, including GLP-1s. And we're always listening to our patients, and several patients reported reduced cravings from alcohol, or maybe their mind had quieted down. There was no longer this push pull towards certain things that didn't necessarily serve them. And after we kept hearing the same thing over and over, you realize that this is not just a coincidence, but what did we miss here? And of course, a lot of patients are taking GLP-1s for the weight loss benefits. But I think for us, what we're most interested in is that this is direct proof that both mental health and metabolic health are speaking to one another and they're very closely related. So, this is something that we're currently exploring, where we're prescribing low doses of GLP-1s to certain patients, using it off label, collecting data, and eventually we'll be publishing our findings.
And of course, still there are some kind of problems also sometimes with GLP-1s. I mean, like in terms of people have nausea or just, can't just, their body might not be able to take it. Or some people report they feel quite the opposite. They feel more like completely unmotivated, have no interest anymore in things, which is, of course, the opposite that they were supposed to create in them in a sense. So, but what or who should not maybe look into this or just very carefully?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really important to take a step back and also understand the rise of telehealth has created such a focus around each of these interventions. And our belief is it's not about any specific molecule, it's the system that you build around the molecule. So people need to have the foundations down before they want to introduce something like a GLP-1. Are you moving your body? Are you eating whole foods? Are you getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, getting sunlight? Have meaningful friendships and relationships. And so I think only after you have those basics down does it make sense to introduce something like a GLP-1. When somebody comes to us and they're asking for a peptide or a GLP-1, our question is, what's your goal? What do you really want to get out of this? And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as to what can and can't be achieved with a specific intervention. So I think it's just having an honest conversation with the patients, and seeing what they would like to get out of treatment, explaining the science to them, and doing a deep dive, looking at their labs, reading all of their metabolic markers, but most importantly, also looking at things like their body composition, not just for their fat tissue, but their lean tissue, and most importantly, measuring their bone density and making sure that when you introduce an intervention like this, it does not affect the person long term. And we've seen this. I'm not going to name names, but there are telehealth companies that are pushing GLP-1s. I can get one shipped to my doorstep by tomorrow. And unfortunately, we've had a number of patients that have lost extreme amounts of weight in a very short time frame. And when we run their body composition, we find that they have osteoporosis, uh, which is irreversible. So we want to continue pushing for not just prescribing, but making sure that the patient is supported and also understands all of the risks associated with taking an intervention like this.
But you also have a very kind of new way of treating patients who come in more with mental health problems in the context of so basically you also use ketamine treatments to connect them to GLP-1 treatments and to basically enhance even more neuroplasticity or maybe insights for the patient where their depression might stem from or like why they ended up having maybe a traumatizing kind of moments in their life. So how do you connect these two very new kind of tools in a way that are, as we know, they're existing independently, but you kind of use both of them in your treatment, which I find very interesting, but it raises immediately the question, how does this go together and how does this look like basically?
Yeah. So ketamine has been a very powerful tool that we've used. One of the main benefits is the fact that it increases neuroplasticity. So we're using ketamine to treat a range of mood disorders, anxiety, treatment-resistant depression, trauma, as well as substance use. And so for a lot of these patients, they are experiencing thought loops and they're engaging in negative behaviors because they have issues with their neuronal pathways. So ketamine helps create more flexibility and can loosen the rigidity of these patterns. We combine GLP-1s with ketamine, especially at the end of the initial phase of the treatment, because what ketamine does is it creates this temporary window of neuroplasticity. What you do within that window is the most powerful, and that's where there is a lasting effect on the durability of the treatment. So the person has gone through ketamine. They are now more amenable to making certain lifestyle changes and behavioral changes. And that's the point in time that we would introduce a GLP-1 and, of course, make sure that we're managing them through our nutritionist, making sure that they're working with one of our strength coaches as well. So I think the combination of two will lead to stronger outcomes. And most importantly, patients that then go on and use a GLP-1, we are creating the right habits and the right environment so that they can actually sustain these behaviors after they come off the GLP-1.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, me coming from the psychedelic therapy space, obviously that's always the kind of the main goal is to look into where does the depression or where does the problems one is carrying around basically come from. And the recognition is very different, as we know, than just going 10, 15 years to therapy, or maybe be even a patient in a psychiatry being on SSRIs. So, but as you mentioned already earlier, mostly this is like it's a never ending process for a person, maybe really suffering from maybe even treatment resistant depression. So, and there's also this phenomenon already where therapists need to check out after 10 years of treatments because it's not a change, it doesn't change, to make it short, like the depression of the patient often. And so, but now you offer this insight into a biology basically that might be the root cause of all of this. So, and a person coming to you like, oh, I've done 15 years of talk therapy, suddenly recognizes probably in a very short time, eventually, that it has never been the cause was never in their psyche, maybe, I mean, or not 100%. So how do you work around this kind of, it's kind of a completely new understanding of a human being for their bodies actually also?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of it is just an educational process, sitting down with the patient and explaining to them that we want to look beyond the symptom. What is the actual biological driver that is causing your anxiety or your depression? There's a lot of research out there that supports the care model that we've built. And sometimes sitting with the patient and just talking to them human to human and really explaining the science behind all of these treatments and these biological processes and how it can affect them, a lot of the time we're able to get their buy-in. And for most people, I think the most emotional moment that they have is these are people that have been labeled as being treatment resistant. They walk around thinking that they're broken, that, nothing can be done to fix them. And when we're able to flag these things, insulin resistance, maybe they're metabolically sick, issues with their cortisol or their hormones, we finally give them a sense of hope. And we have all of these interventions that we can use at our disposal. And I think from there, the question shifts from what's wrong with me to why hasn't somebody looked at this sooner? And that's the conversation that we tend to have with a lot of patients.
I mean, you have you have a clinic in New York and you open probably further clinics, but also you're working on a scalable model for this, which is called Flow, which people all over the country, which is, sometimes in smaller cities, could be supported by. So maybe you can talk about Flow and your plans
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. Yeah. So, one of the things that we realized through our work with Fountain is there isn't a lack of data. The bigger issue is that all of this data is fragmented. Labs and biomarkers live in one place, wearables technology in another. Clinician notes, therapy response, interventions, patient reported questionnaires, all of these things are scattered and nobody is looking at the full picture. So we want to build flow that will actually be able to connect all of these dots. And flow is going to be created for patients and practitioners. From the patient perspective, it's going to be able to map out to a patient where they're at in their health journey. And for providers, it's going to be able to paint a continuous and evolving picture of the person that's sitting in front of them. Today, mental health care is very episodic. Patients are coming in for a treatment or for a session. They're very insightful. Typically they feel very secure. But when they step out into that gap in between sessions, that's where the outcomes tend to plateau. Patients might have some sort of trigger, they might relapse, they might drop out. And our idea with flow is by tracking the biology, by tracking different self report questionnaires, by getting signals from your wearables, we can actually get to the point where we can catch a crisis before it happens. And our goal is to make the time in between sessions become a part of treatment. And for clinicians, this would be able to flag things and catch certain higher risk patients and flag things ahead of time before it's too late.
I mean, we heard today a lot about how, let's say, if majority of people would engage in GLP-1s, which probably at one point happens, like other industries are going to be affected, like the food industry, even the air travel industry. Like it's very interesting how just the understanding of the human body, a new understanding that we're just in the middle of experiencing, will affect like things that we cannot even think about right now yet. So, but in your practice or in your clinics, like if somebody really changes their kind of metabolic systems and just really gets into it, how do their lives change actually? Or what changes do they make in their daily lives? What do you think mainly?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, for a lot of these treatments, we're not looking at anything in isolation. So, take the example of somebody losing weight. There are several different upstream and downstream effects that a patient will experience. They're going to become a lot more confident, they're going to feel healthier, more opportunities are going to open for them. And I think, our job is to be there and support them, not just by providing and prescribing the intervention, but making sure that we have the right specialists, whether it's executive coaches, nutritionists, strength trainers, teaching these patients how to regulate their nervous system. And so our goal is to attack these issues from multiple different perspectives and across several disciplines. And I think when you're doing that, the care plan that you create for the patient is not going to have any gaps.
But do you think at one point there doesn't need to be a plan anymore? Do you know what I mean? That just you could transform your understanding of your own body, that you just know what to do in a sense. Do you know what I mean? Is that possible? Or is this too fast?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years. The technology is going to get very powerful. There's going to become a lot more research out there. GLP-3s, which is something that's on the horizon.
Yeah. Can you say something about that?
Yeah,
Missed that a
sure.
little bit.
So Eli and Lilly is going under stage 3 clinical trials for GLP-3s. These are very different from GLP-1s because based on the initial studies, patients are losing up to 30% of their body weight. So it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen with the future of these weight loss medications. In the US specifically, a lot of employers have started to cover GLP-1s, and the demand has been so excessive that the companies are actually cutting it out of their programs because of how costly it's becoming to employers. So I think in the future, there's going to be a lot more accessibility. But at the same time, we want to make sure that all of these things are being tracked and adjusted and monitored longitudinally, and that these plans are actually evolving with the patient, just like their biology.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Good
Thank you.
kind of last words to the beginning of this conference this morning.
Yeah.
There's already a GLP-3 coming.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you for being here, and thank you, GL, for the nice introduction.